My name is Steve OBrien. I'm the Senior Vice President of Talent at a clinical research organization called Syneos Health. I've worked for the past 8 years in what I feel is the intersection of artificial intelligence and talent acquisition in particular. Because I've worked with really smart people who include me in their work, I've had the opportunity to patent a lot of algorithms as well, some of which are in different technologies that may be in place in some of your organizations. So very nice to meet you all. We will be introducing our illustrious panel here shortly, but as the introduction said, we're going to talk a bit about AI strategies that are revolutionizing HR. We'll probably have about 30 minutes of content, and then we will pause. And so think of questions that you like answered. If we don't know the answer, we'll make it up. And with that, would you introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about how your work intersects with AI?
Yes, so I'm Sean Sanders. I am the Global Head of Data Science at Randstad Sourceright. Randstad is the global leader in HR services. And as a data science leader, I work in artificial intelligence. So I interact with the business and many of our clients on how to either evaluate different AI technology or to build and develop these AI technologies and challenge folks in terms of, is it useful for the organization? Is it useful for talent, which is who we're trying to serve first and foremost, and also thinking from an ethical perspective and privacy perspective, right? Because these are much legal consideration in this space, but on top of that, there's the ethical components you must think about as well. So that's a little bit about me. Happy to be here. I guess I'll pass it on.
Great. Yeah, Jimmy Zhang. So I head up global talent acquisition at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. I'm also stepping in as the interim head of people analytics. The funny thing is actually my background is primarily in people analytics and strategy before I actually transition over to heading global talent acquisition at Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So from a Takeda standpoint, Takeda is actually one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world with 53,000 employees globally in 80 countries. On an annual basis last year, we hire about 10,000 people as well. So in order for us to be able to actually locate the right talent, we actually use a lot of AI-driven tools and approach to get them to be able to join the company, as well as helping them grow their careers so that they will stay with Takeda. So that's how my work actually intersects with in this AI space, where we actually use AI in the whole entire life cycle of employees joining and leaving.
Great, thanks. So I'm Kevin Gorman. I'm a product management executive at Wells Fargo. I am currently leading up the HR data transformations. I like to say my focus at the company, pretty similar to, I think, a lot of what we've heard at the conference so far, at least what I've heard at the conference around foundation building. Our mandate is really around getting data and insights out to the HR organization, to business leaders at scale. I've been with Wells for about 8 months now. Prior to that, I was at Verizon as the head of the people analytics organization there, and at Capital One for a number of years before that. So I've been in the HR space for about 6 or 7 years now. Before that, primarily doing data science work or analytics work in core banking and technology. So have done a lot of work to kind of embed ML algorithms into data products, BI products, in ways that help draw people's attention to areas that matter, insights that are important, things that they need to pay attention to really drive and improve their business. So lots of focus for us right now really at building the foundations, getting all of our data together, making sure it's high quality, accessible, and ready to kind of serve as the foundation for a number of AI ML exercises that we hope to undertake to really kind of power our talent forward and create a sustained kind of competitive advantage from talent.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So we're going to start with exploring how each of you have brought AI to bear on a gnarly problem that you've been wrestling with in data or in HR. We'll start with you.
A gnarly problem. I think I'll just start with HR is full of gnarly problems. And it gets more challenging when you think of the availability of data, being able to have organizations and talent share that data, and also what you can do with that data from a use case perspective. One of the bigger challenges that we're looking into now is how do we integrate data from multiple data sources, for example, supply data that's available online or through what we get through our own internal systems, and also combine that with demand data and combine that with compensation data along with our end-to-end business process, right? So when you think of what it takes to first, hire a talent to go through the entire pipeline, what are the bottlenecks with that system? How do you model that? And how did you build your recruiting pipeline? Do you have a single person doing recruiting, screening, interviewing, onboarding, or are you splitting things up? And which is more efficient? And how do you build constraints and bottlenecks into that process? Maybe you have only a certain amount of budget or time. Maybe there's certain holidays across different parts of the globe. So how do you get this to work at scale? So there's the data challenges associated with that. There's the modeling challenges associated with that. And then there's the data literacy component of it as well, right? When folks hear AI, explainability is critical. One thing that we try to do is ensure that we prioritize explainability into the models that we choose, right? These are impacting people's lives. If the model can't be explained in a way that makes sense, especially for all the different niches within the industry, right? Software development behaves one way, healthcare behaves another way. So there's a long tail of issues that can go on. So scaling that is a challenge.
Do you mind double clicking on explainability and why it matters to us in HR?
Let me think about that. And
all right, I didn't tell Sean I was going to do that, so I'll come back to you.
Yeah, well, I can go into a little bit of detail, right? I guess one key component, and this isn't necessarily to combining data sources, but think from a search and match perspective, right? Average recruiter makes a decision on whether to proceed with the next step with an applicant in about 6 seconds or less, which is scary, right? You're making a decision on someone in 6 seconds or less. So how do you ensure that the technology that you're using can be inclusive to ensure that the right people are reviewing that person's resume in the appropriate way? So there's biases that's built into us as humans. You can build AI to educate folks that, hey, maybe this person doesn't have exactly what you're looking for, but this is a related skill. But how do you explain that? You can't just post the resume in a certain order. You need to explain that outcome. So having the AI explain why you recommended that person, even though it's not what you're necessarily looking for, is key, both from a talent experience perspective and even from customers or clients who are able to get someone who can do the job in a timely manner.
Oftentimes, algorithms make predictions in ways that you can't really explain well. And in the space of HR and human capital, that's not something that we're comfortable with, right, for obvious reasons. And so hopefully you've had an interesting experience learning about the different technologies. One of the things I think is interesting within the HR domain is how we're going to apply some of these capabilities, but doing it in a space where, to your point around explainability, that we've got the transparency that we require to be comfortable with human capital decisions being made on the basis of these predictions. Jimmy, over to you.
So before I jump into it, I just want to echo. So Sean, from the perspective of explainability, so one of the things that we do is we like to explore different technology, either actually building it internally or actually buying it. I think buying it is almost the easiest path. One of the key things that, from an explainability standpoint, we actually went out and procured multiple different solutions around neutralizing job descriptions so that you can actually remove bias from job descriptions. And we actually tested multiple different vendor technology throughout the company in different business units. And what we found out is actually we didn't see any impact on it, right? So when you actually ask for the details of a lot of these algorithms, they won't actually give it to you. But when you actually test it internally, we actually saw time to fill actually going up. At the same time, we actually saw less candidates coming in. So that might be very specific to the Takeda use case, but that's something that, in my mind, in addition to explainability, you also have to test the model itself not just actually test it once, you have to continuously test it because the environment might actually change. Something that you bring in at one point might work well, but over time it will deteriorate. So that's one. Going back to some of the key problems that we're trying to let's say solve. I think going to a very HR term, because I actually grew up in HR. I've been in HR forever for my whole entire career. One of the things that we always want to do is enable best, right? So enable best you, enable best team, and enable best company. And how do you do that is usually do, in my mind, 3 KPIs, right? One of them is attract the best talent, develop the best talent, and also actually retain the best talent. So if you can actually connect those things, then it becomes extremely powerful. So when we actually think about problems to solve with AI, is typically falling into those 3 buckets. I'll start with the attraction piece of it. So one of the key things that we want to do is there's a lot of also vendors and tools out there that will give you the quantity of talent in each of the markets, but they don't really give you the quality of talent. So one of the things that we have been trying to figure out and partner with external companies and internally is trying to actually figure out the quality of talent by using actually external data, right? So a lot of times people say that, oh, you know, like from a data science standpoint, it might be specific to bigger companies, but in reality, we all have equal access to external data. So in that case, how do we actually use external data, actually use it in a different way so that we can actually start to actually get to quality of talent? And we have been actually able to do it with success in software engineers because there's a lot of external signals. We were able to do it with traditional engineers, and we were able to do it with scientists. So by doing that, then we can actually start to be proactive in trying to go to market, identify the talent, pull them into the pipeline, and when we need them, they're there, that we can actually pull on as well. And on an annual basis, we generate about 500,000 candidate profiles as well. Imagine over time, we actually have more of an internal, I would say, database. At one point, I think the goal is going to be we are going to know more about your employees than you do. And that's really what we're trying to actually get to in terms of that attraction piece of it. And when they actually come into the organization, what we want them to do is actually grow their career as well. One of the top reasons of employees actually leaving the company, and I know it's not specific to Takeda, is probably everyone, is career development. There's just a lot more career opportunities externally than you actually have internally. That's just the reality, right? So, and you wish people the best when they actually move on and find a better job. But at the end of the day, if we can actually understand that a little bit more, if we can actually help people grow their skills, then there's a higher chance of us being able to actually retain them. So we deploy an AI solution to be able to actually match people to mentors, match people to short-term assignments, match people to open jobs. And ultimately, the data that we're gathering, we are going to be able to actually move into more of that strategic workforce planning era, like stage, where we can actually start to reskill people. Because now we know the quickest path to actually reskill as well. So those are some of the problems that we're trying to tackle.
That's very cool. Two double-click questions. You had mentioned there's a lot of external signals in engineering. Can you talk a little bit about what counts as an external signal?
Yeah. So you know, when we talk about, I think the space that we can talk about is maybe from a software engineering standpoint, right? So there's certain companies you cannot dispute that they produce probably the best talent. Meta, Google, and so on. So you can actually just keep on, you know, naming certain of those companies. If you actually then look at the makeup of the engineers in those companies, then you are going to actually start to look at what features might be important to predicting quality. And based on that, if you apply that to the industry, there's also open source as well, for example, GitHub, then what you are going to actually start to see is people movement. So when an engineer actually moves from, let's say, Apple over to a startup, and then back to another startup, because you actually have those features, then you can actually identify that person as a quality talent, and we aggregate it at the company level, then you can understand the quality of engineers for a specific company. So that's what we're trying to understand, is to do that type of mapping and exercise on trying to identify talent.
Yeah. And that's a really novel application of external signals. Jimmy and I were talking before this session, and I got excited about that, admittedly. And then the other double-click question, so the AI making recommendations for mentorship relationships is really pretty cool. What data points is the system ingesting in order to make the recommendations?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is it's really self-reported data. So what we ask, so I think there's a couple of things, right? You have to reciprocate what you actually give them. So when you actually say, hey, give me your information, you want to actually give them something back. So in that case, we asked for basically their job history, skills information, where they want to develop their skills, and so on. And then we actually put all of those into a match in terms of mentorship, in terms of career pathing, and so on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I'd like to just add on to what you're mentioning. In addition to skills growth, right, and different organizations that people move on to, talent are also interested in the purpose of an organization. Like, what is your mission? What are you all about? What do you believe in? So in addition to monitoring self-reported information, there's also social media channels where there's tons of conversations happening as well. And it's an interesting application of Gen AI to go down that path and see, hey, you ask a question, what do people think about the pay transparency? And if you had a job posting out there and you gave them an offer on the lower end of the range, right? How is that impacting your ability to attract and retain talent? So there's many signals available in addition to the self-reported, but even the social context, which oftentimes get ignored in this industry.
I appreciate that. Kevin, you are very patient and excited to hear a bit about what gnarly problems you're solving with AI.
Yeah, wonderful. So I'll actually hit, since I think we're still kind of very much in the build phase, this will be something that I think we want to do here in the future and probably with more advanced methodologies. But one of the things that I've done a couple of times in prior gigs, and I think one of the constant things that you'll hear from HR leaders especially is, or even business leaders, am I doing well, right? Like, is my culture good, right? Is my engagement score where it needs to be? Is turnover where it ought to be, right? Am I comfortable with these things? What does good look like? What does great look like, right? And so one of the challenges that we've been tasked with as we kind of put together data products to put out to business leaders and to business partners and things like that was, how do we contextualize some of the data points that they have? And so we went down a pathway of building out a lot of synthetic controls around different key HR metrics, right? Your engagement, your attrition, promotions, other things like that, so that we could get a sense for what is that leader's contribution or the organizational context's contribution to these metrics, right? How do you kind of distill out kind of exogenous market factors, right? Tax accountants tend to leave companies very rarely, call center employees all the time. And so how do you then compare a leader's performance on retention if you need to compare leaders that do kind of dramatically different things, right? And so there was a phenomenally good talk, I think, earlier today from a person at Amazon around the concept of this synthetic control methodology. And it's just, I think, tremendously important to kind of distill out and say, hey, yeah, you're doing a great job. Yes, your engagement looks low, but you're managing a team of people who are typically much less engaged than other employees, and you're actually doing phenomenally well compared to the baseline expectation for this group. And so lots of, I think, work that we put in to really contextualize these metrics, because otherwise they look like, it's a dashboard full of metrics and maybe I need to care about it, maybe I don't need to care about it, right? HR organizations, especially in business leaders' times focused on some of these people topics are limited. And so if you don't need to be solving a retention problem, you should focus your energies elsewhere. If you do need to be focused on, inclusion problems, know that you need to be focused on that. And so those types of things I think have been really, really powerful. And I'm pretty excited about some of the future capabilities in this space with some of the new methodologies that have kind of come out, in the last 3, 4, 5 years to kind of do this in much more sophisticated ways. Because again, super common problem space in HR, and it's tough for HR organizations, I think, to prioritize their focus and where they're emphasizing and deploying resources. And in the absence of kind of a well-grounded number, right, you're out kind of optimizing on a metric that's actually not going to drive difference, or one that you're performing quite well at.
That's fascinating that you've begun to apply the controls. So I'm curious, how do you establish the boundary conditions that you're going to apply?
Say more about that?
Yeah, so when you're looking at a manager that is managing a call center, right? And so you don't want to penalize them in their score because there's a base rate that's greater for turnover there. How do you establish the base rates or the comparators so that you're applying that correct consideration?
So, I mean, this is where we're kind of taking a look at, a variety of different factors. I mean, we're effectively kind of building, it doesn't have to be a perfectly good model, but a reasonably well predictive model that helps us to understand what intrinsic characteristics about an employee might drive propensity for attrition or propensity for high or low engagement, and starting to kind of group and segment out the employees in ways that allow us to then kind of mix together, say, job family or level or tenure might be big drivers of attrition, is start to kind of create a synthetic org that looks very similar to that leader's org, but is drawn from other leaders' organizations, normalize out all of the noise, kind of looking at a big chunk of the overall population, and essentially set for each leader kind of a customized benchmark based on only internal data for what they should really be shooting for. So it really is kind of looking at the empiricals of performance that you're seeing and starting to kind of normalize out the differences across the key drivers of difference within that metric.
It's fascinating. It's cool. How many employees do you have?
At Wells right now,
Yeah.
about 250,000.
250,000. So I come from an organization with 30,000. For those that are with smaller organizations, I wonder if we can get the right magnitude of effect from our employee populations to get that controlled for. But that is, in my humble opinion, the right thing to shoot at, is what are the base rates. And one of the things in HR that we want to watch pretty carefully is when we're working with mean regressing patterns, not to performance manage people against anomaly data sets. So let's switch gears a little bit. It's very exciting to hear how you guys are applying AI to solve gnarly problems. There's another piece of the puzzle that we have in human resources, and it's adoption. And so I'd love to hear a story, whether it be a headwind or a victory, that you've had driving adoption in your organization of a tool or a practice related to artificial intelligence. We'll start with you, Sean.
It's always great to go first. So I say there's several I could think of. I think adoption really starts with data literacy and understanding what the users are looking for, and ensuring that the feedback from the users are taken into account into the development of the tool, right? So one thing that we struggle with, to this day is there's the domain experts who've been doing this type of work for decades, years and years and years, and then there's the technologists who come in with very little HR knowledge, myself included, thinking we can build tools that's going to help you do your job. So there's a confidence there, but it shouldn't be misplaced, right? You should definitely open yourself up if you're building applications of these nature. Ensure that you get a good sample of users. I believe you mentioned something in that talk yesterday about innovators. Those are the ones you want to reach out to, in addition to the whole organization, to get the feedback and integrate that into your product. And it's not going to be rolled out perfect on the first time. There's several kind of business intelligence tools that we're using that does compensation modeling and reports on that internally across the globe, and different niche job markets. Folks have an opinion of, or what they've seen of, hey, I know how much this market pays. And confirmation bias is a real thing. You're kind of looking to see the number to be a certain way. And going back to explainability conversation, if you're presenting something that's contrary to that, it could be challenging. So the explainability with whatever tool we've had has been very helpful to increase adoption by a large amount. But also taking the feedback and saying this is the rate, this is why it looks this way. We understand your experience, but can you help us? Can you help us get the data points that's going to allow us to better provide the information that you need to serve your clients and your folks, right? So that's just one use case.
Would I be hearing you correctly if I were to say that your rollout strategy is included hypercare, that you're working closely with the first groups to get their feedback integrated? Is that right?
Yes, so there's definitely a phased rollout. So there's ideation, where you work with the business to decide what are your core problems, and you really figure that out. And then there's folks who are more excited to, I don't want to use the word guinea pigs, but to be the first ones to use this product. And then it iterates from there. You get the feedback, and then you expand the pool, get additional feedback. And there was also a great talk here at the conference talking about the long tail, the QA process, and ensuring that you can deal with these niche conditions. The goal of AI is to generalize in general, right? But the long tail is where we live in many cases. There's so many specializations within HR in particular. If you don't address it, then it truly isn't informative or useful to the organization. So you have to be aware of those things and ensure that you're taking those individual preferences into account without overdoing it, else your development is never over. So it's really picking and choosing within reason what needs to be included and what shouldn't, and how to develop a strategy to get that continuous feedback to improve the product.
Thanks for that, Sean. How about you, Jimmy? What's your adoption experience been?
Yeah, so I think for me, so I learned this over time. I think the implementation accounts for probably 20% of the work. I think that 80% is actually what change management. So that's how I usually see it. So I'll share a couple of examples. One of them was around turnover prediction, right? So a lot of times HR, that's the binary outcome of you either stay or you leave. So it's actually the easiest to actually create a predictive model. So I deployed that actually in 2 different organizations, and the outcome was totally different. One of them was basically them coming back to me and say, you're just telling me something that I know. I don't know how is this adding value from an HR perspective. So when you learn over time that actually, if you can actually make people's job easier, make them smarter, make them faster, they then appreciate that a little bit more. So in the second organization, I actually focus a lot more energy on change management aspect of it, and people actually really appreciated the insight that they're getting from a turnover standpoint, and there was an organizational-wide effort to actually work on this together, right? So same model, but different outcomes. Same thing with resume screening. So one of the things that we have is I implemented resume screening in 2 different companies. One of them is, hey, this is really, like we do a better job from a recruiter standpoint actually doing screening than the machine can. And then now we actually pivoted the message. It was more around basically speed. You can actually free up a lot of administrative work so that you can actually leave it to AI, and then you can actually be a strategic partner. That message works really well, and you see essentially adoption going up the roof. So for me, it's really understanding deeply the human nature and what people care about in my mind.
I'm interested in that pivot. Tell me if you think this is a fair rephrasing. So you went from an argument that we can do it better to that we can do it good enough so that you can do something else. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. And additionally, I don't think sometimes accuracy matters less, like you mentioned, right? Yeah. It's really about basically people know the reason for using it, in my mind.
So we're at the early days of a pretty exciting revolution. So I'll just make an opinion comment here as you guys go back to your companies. Arguments in HR that are predicated upon we're removing somebody from the process tend to elicit enormous amounts of resistance, right? I've recently read an article by an unnamed thought leader who his headline claim was, AI is better than people at this, but HR is belligerent. That's my word, not his. It's not a particularly persuasive argument, right? And so I think that there's a lot of wisdom, Jimmy, in how you guys pivoted to suggest that it's not about a competition between you and the machine. It's a question of, can it do it well enough that you can go off and do something that the machine can't? So really interesting experience and observation. How about you, Kevin?
So I think from an adoption standpoint, Sean, I probably couldn't agree with you more in terms of the foundation being in data literacy in this space. I think similar to some of this underlying data challenges that HR organizations tend to face, data literacy is a place to kind of really invest a ton in upfront, right? I've come into organizations where, big percentages of the business partner group were intimidated of a fairly basic kind of Tableau dashboard with lots of slice and dice capabilities, right? And I think being able to kind of overcome the discomfort with data and data-driven decision-making, give people some tools in the toolkit early on, I think really does open up the receptiveness to more sophisticated and more difficult to kind of understand, potentially black box type methodologies, if they feel kind of comfortable and empowered with the baseline data. And so we do a lot to kind of like expose some of that early on, do basic kind of data literacy training, get people comfortable with some of those things. And I think, one of the other things that I would echo is Jimmy, you'd mentioned change management being 80% of it. Like, I think a tremendously valuable place to invest time as a people analytics organization trying to put some of this stuff out there is really kind of like, putting the elbow grease in and spending time with stakeholders, doing some hand-holding, white glove service, and trying to really kind of get people comfortable with the use cases, right? If you're building the products right, the insights kind of come out in a really readily usable way, given the kind of baseline data literacy and expectations of the organization. That hand-holding approach, the key examples of how am I going to use this in my day-to-day business? How will it make my day more efficient? How will it cut kind of work out or allow me to kind of be a more strategic thought partner with my clients? They'll start to see the value. They'll start to kind of adopt. Also that kind of really tight coupling with kind of end users and stakeholders of the product give you an opportunity to continue to refine the model and the insights that it generates based on their feedback and inputs, right? So that you are kind of dialed in the right way. I've certainly seen organizations, HR organizations that, do get, burned either by a vendor product that's not been implemented particularly well or particularly insightfully, right? I've seen, even basic kind of like NLP products from survey vendors that, the very first pass, as you might expect, not super heavily trained on the firm's data, more kind of external data. It doesn't align with how people think about it, right? Sentiment looks all neutral. The topics don't match with what people are expecting. And now, there's a shade over NLP and future use cases. And so keeping them engaged, making sure that folks have a good understanding for how iterative the process can be, how much better the models will get over time with more data exposure, with more training, I think buys you some of that goodwill to invest and kind of continue to improve the model versus getting that kind of immediate resistance of A, I don't understand this thing, B, it's not generating results consistent with what I would expect, and C, you guys aren't listening to me and improving the product, and so I'm just not going to use it and I'm not going to deal with it. I'll go do something else, or I'll stick with what I'm currently doing in Excel or whatever else.
Thanks for that, Kevin. So we've got just about 5 minutes left. I promised you 10 for questions. We can take it up afterwards. But I would like to make sure we set a few minutes aside. Any questions that you'd like to ask? We've got quite a crew here who have implemented some of the more impressive aspects. And then I learned yesterday, Sean actually has a PhD in computer science. I've learned the language. He actually knows how it works. You guys have been awesome. Join me in giving a hand to our panelists here. Great job.